right. We mentioned him before. Congressman Pat Ryan, thank you for joining us on the program here, New York's 18th District. Congressman Mike and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the program with us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Appreciate maybe we'll talk a little football. We're talking a little football before this, but I know more serious topics too. So thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan, so appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's right. There's going to be some bad football coming up that people are going to be able to tune in over the holiday break. But first, for you, I know you're thankful for a victory up there in New York's 18th district. We were talking off air a little bit about my familiarity with the Poughkeepsie area and stuff like that. And I think I heard you on Pod Save America with Tommy Vitor. And a lot has been made of the analysis part of this. And Nick and I have talked about this with Democratic strategists and Congressman Seth Moulton about how you win in what could be potentially a purple district with voters that, tend to have voted for Donald Trump. Looking back before we look forward at the Trump administration coming in, what do you take away from your victory back in November and the message that you've been sending out now as you've done all this media to Democrats about how to win a district that could be conservative leaning?
Yeah, I mean, this district is a perfect sort of bellwether and example of the complexity of the country. Where 2 years ago, when I first ran for the seat, I won by 1%, 1.3%. And this time, after a lot of work and just really aggressively reaching out to everybody, starting with early and often folks who I know didn't vote for me, we won by over 13%. So that's something I'm really proud of, and the result of, kind of to your question, like there's no shortcut for actually putting in the work, showing up. I have 82 different towns spread from the Pennsylvania, New Jersey border on the west end of the district to the Connecticut border in the mid Hudson Valley. That does proudly include Poughkeepsie, of course, and my hometown, Kingston. And we just showed up over and over and over, actually listened, which I certainly feel like every politician, especially Democrats, haven't done enough of. And then we delivered for people in ways that might not make national news, certainly, but like, you get somebody $20,000 back from the IRS they've been battling for years, and we just had this happen last week. That's a life-changing thing that helps that family, and that person starts to rebuild trust again with sort of government that a lot of people are losing trust in. And you do that at scale over 2 years, and you can see that you can sort of move the needle. And I mean, there were thousands of people in my district who voted for Trump for president and voted for me as representative. And that's a hard thing for, I think, a lot of more politically minded people to hold. But for just regular folks just trying to get through their day and put a roof over their family's head and food on the table, like, I actually think there's a lot. It makes a lot of sense.
Congressman, just to go off of the increase in numbers of your margin of victory, that's an anomaly considering where the party generally ended up on November 5th. What do you think? And you talked about this too, about those who voted for, the returning president, Donald Trump. And for you, what seems to be the through line between your success, those who chose to return back to, Donald Trump returning to the White House? Where's the connection? I'm not trying to obviously say there's anything remotely connecting you and the former president, but clearly there's a message that you both are putting out that's resonating with voters in your district.
Yeah, I think it's like there's like I've said it this way a few times, there's a substance and a style component to it, and both matter. I mean, I think on the substance of the less like some wonky policy, but more the substance for us was we centered this affordability crisis that everywhere in the country, but especially in the Hudson Valley. I mean, it's really, really bad, especially housing costs, whether you're a young person trying to rent, start somebody at my stage with young kids trying to buy a home, which is basically impossible, or you're a senior kind of priced out as you're on fixed income. Everybody, 80-90% of people are struggling with housing affordability as an example of this. And we just haven't done really anything to materially lower those costs for folks. So centering affordability on housing, healthcare, gas, groceries, utilities was really important. And then, I think one of the things stylistically I did in common with the president-elect and other good, I had a lot of other House colleagues do really well in other places too. Certainly not anything we did alone, but campaigns are about like storytelling, right? And convincing people to trust you is about telling them a story about where you want to take things and where we are. And if you think about good stories, they have heroes and villains, right? And in Trump's story, the villains, like we all know, the long list of the villains that he talks about, and the divisive and kind of demonizing way he does it. And in his story, the hero is him. Like he is the authoritarian only person who can fix everybody's problems. To me, the story we need to tell and that we tried to tell in our campaign, we did call out villains. Like we called out our local utility, Central Hudson. I don't know if you ever had to deal with these guys when you were hanging out in Poughkeepsie, but local utility monopoly screwed over thousands of people in the district. I'll spare you the long story, but we showed our willingness to name names and name villains and take them on and actually win and help people. And so naming the villains and then centering like people, the American people, in my case, my constituents, as the heroes. Like working people are the heroes, small business owners are the heroes, entrepreneurs, people starting companies, people starting podcasts, like people that are scrappy and hungry that go back to the founding patriotic roots of this country, centering that as, those folks as the hero. I think that's the need and opportunity space we have here to contrast with Trump and the MAGA movement.
I'm so glad you brought up, first of all, a couple of things there. I know about the Hudson Valley rising housing costs because in Westchester, you can't afford a home. So you move to the Hudson Valley, like you just mentioned, which a lot of my friends have done. So, but piggybacking off of something you kind of just mentioned there about taking the issue and making it kind of local or at least granular about the people itself. We just had Marie Harf, a Democratic strategist, on who ran Seth Moulton's campaign and obviously worked at the State Department during the Obama administration. We were talking to her a little bit about during the election about just the sheer numbers of, folks like you that won a district, but also Trump got, a good percentage of the votes. And a lot was around the ground messaging and stuff like that. And I'm so glad that you mentioned some of it, but I'm curious for you, some of these national issues, transgender issues, and it looked like a lot of the advertising, especially Nick lives in Pennsylvania, so he's right in a swing state. Penn State football games, every ad being run was about Kamala, they, them. Now we're seeing it with one of your, one of your members of Congress there, your colleagues, Seth Moulton. Salem Democrats are upset about something he said about a national issue with transgender issues. How do you fight? We asked Marie this. She couldn't answer it, and she's a campaign manager. So let's ask a member of Congress. How do you combat somebody that throws spaghetti on the wall and lets it stick and people are like, that spaghetti looks great? Like, how do you combat somebody that is fighting something that you were like, this should make sense to everybody? Like, let's not focus on that issue. We should be protecting the rights of them. But there are other issues that are playing out that are affordability, pocketbook issues. How do you fight that battle, Congressman?
I mean, I think you hit it. It's discipline. Like it's recognizing that Trump and in this case Nancy Mace and a lot of these other folks are doing what I've called like division by distraction. They understand that rather than want to talk about either convicted or known or proven sexual predators, they're literally nominating for cabinet positions. Rather than talk about that, they're going to try to distract and divide at the same time around really demonizing, in my view, a good public servant who just got elected by their constituents to represent them and has taken that mindset of, I'm not here to talk about this stuff. This is my colleague, Sarah McBride from Delaware. I'm not here to talk about that stuff. I'm here to get shit done for my district. So I do think Democrats are bad at message discipline as a collective. We try to do everything and fight a lot of fights, and that's noble and almost endearing. But when you try to be everything to everyone, you can end up quickly being sort of nothing to anyone because you're just trying to do too much. So to me, message discipline, staying focused on everything we did was tied back to affordability and lowering costs. And we just obsessively, every discrete, concrete event we did always centered our constituents and talked about we were doing something based on what we heard. Usually it was in response to some financial pressure. And then we were closing that loop there and letting people know we were fighting for them and against these villains that we were naming. And I do think staying local helps you insulate from all this national stuff where if people know you're concretely working on a real visceral thing and you're showing them that, then when these kind of national bad faith attacks come, and we have millions of dollars of attack ads spent against us on total, misleading at best information, people are like, yeah, I know that person. That's not who they are, and that's not. So I think that's the best antidote to it, is just head down, do the work, stay local, and message discipline.
I think that's the episode title here for our editor, Message Discipline. I know Nick's going to like that episode title a lot. But so Congressman, you kind of mentioned somebody there, and I want to pivot to some of these cabinet appointees, because Pete Hegseth is somebody, and you served in our nation's military. We thank you for our service. And thank you for your service, And Pete served as well in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I worked at Fox News as a weekend PA on Fox and Friends. I happen to know Pete. I go on Fox News on political panels. I have a lot of friends there. The issue is not Pete Hegseth served in the military. The issue is somebody being in charge of the entire operation and being in charge of the Department of Defense, the Pentagon. I shouldn't be in charge of News Corp. I shouldn't be the CEO of News Corp just because I happen to work there for 2 years as a PA. Be that as it may, about his experience and stuff like that, you saw this come across the scroll about the first cabinet pick. I mean, obviously, Matt Gaetz has dropped since. There's been some others that we're going to get into. But this one for you personally, just being a veteran and seeing Pete not have really the subject matter expertise to lead the nation's biggest military. What do you make of this? Do you think he gets confirmed?
I hope not. I've been very clear and, outside the normal norms of what you normally would say, and saying, I think if he should withdraw from consideration, if what he said is true, which is he values our troops, he values our country's safety and national security, he should understand that, to your point, he is woefully, inadequately unqualified in terms of leading the largest organization on the planet. The Pentagon is the largest office building in the world. Our military is millions of people, incredibly complex, dangerous time. He's said some things that I think are deeply at odds with our values, particularly his, I think, insulting women who have given their lives in combat, lost limbs. One of my good friends lost her arm in combat. Senator Duckworth lost both legs. I mean, how can you say women? It's just deeply against who we are, I think, as a country. Not to mention all the what seem to be credible issues around his own predatory sexual behavior and requiring a woman to sign an NDA. I mean, there's a lot there, and it all comes back to me. I should have started with this, that it's about our troops. Like, they deserve better than this. I mean, the Secretary of Defense, like, essentially holds the lives of our most precious resource, our young men and women brave enough to sign up to serve. Like, they hold those lives in their hand effectively. And I just don't think he gets that. And I mean, I'd be curious your take. You know him better than I've never met him, but he's written 2 books, at least that I know of. There's some pretty wild stuff in there, to be kind.
Just on high level, I've met Pete a couple of times, and I've been texting with people at Fox News, and it's just the common refrain is woefully unqualified. And this is from people that are contributors there now that either worked for the State Department, they worked at the Department of Defense. A good friend of Nick and I's is a Pentagon correspondent. There's a lot of that doesn't make sense. Again, I look at it more, and going back to your analogy, this is why I think I like you, Congressman. I try to analogize it by saying, in any other walk of life, if somebody worked somewhere for 2 years, should they be now made president of that organization? That doesn't make sense. And I think the hilarity in all of it is that he's a weekend anchor. Like, he's not even a daytime anchor. He's a weekend anchor. And but it truly is not funny, because we're putting people's lives at risk by having somebody who's never managed more than 40 people at a nonprofit, be in charge of the largest organization out there. So go ahead, Nick. I didn't want to cut you off there, buddy.
No, I mean, well, seriously though, I mean, to that end, when we think of these recent nominations, and we've all now just unpack one person who is woefully unqualified, and that may be Mike the title actually of this episode. We also then head over to DNI with potentially Tulsi Gabbard, former congresswoman. What, Congressman, do you think is the theme with these appointments as it relates to the support of our current systems, fealty to the incoming president? Like, to a citizen, to someone in your district, to anyone here in this country, we look at these appointments from this incoming administration, and we should think what?
I think there's multiple levels to it. I think at the sort of more philosophical level and the level of the founding values of our country, it goes directly counter to this idea that we take in every public servant. I took it as a commissioned officer. I've taken it as a member of Congress to support and defend our Constitution, not an individual, and the values enshrined in the Constitution. And clearly, these picks are so far in the direction of like fealty to an individual and arguably sort of a cult personality in ways that we've seen over history generally don't turn out too well here when you have folks who prize personal loyalty over the patriotic duty to the country. So I think that's an important level, but that can feel abstract, right? Like that's in the history books and at the high level. At the material level, this is going to be damaging to people's lives. Like Secretary of Defense, any family with an active duty service member could see their loved one in a more dangerous situation, led by someone, if it's a woman service member, which is almost half our force, who essentially says, I don't put this person, your loved one, risking their life on an equal plane. Another example that I don't think has been talked about enough on these cabinet picks, there's something called CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They oversee 67 million Americans that count on Medicare, including my parents and a lot of seniors across the country. And they put Dr. Oz, who's like a literal proven snake oil salesman, bought and paid for by like more different lobbies and special interests and pharma companies than you can possibly imagine, in charge of something that will materially affect the health of like a fifth of the country. And we're barely even talking about that. And it's almost this flood the zone of, so you can tell I am very frustrated. And it's easy to get into like the personality of it and the sort of national politics of it, but we got to center it back to your heart of your question, like how it'll affect people's everyday lives. And I think it'll be incredibly damaging.
Congressman, before we let you go, and you just kind of fed into this perfectly, and I want to ask you this because I want to bring it back to the listener who's listening to this that says, so what is their plan for 25 and beyond? So let's take it a little bit more granular than that. For you as a sitting member of Congress coming into 25, knowing the midterms in 26, what's your plan of attack? Like, what's your strategy here? Is it, hey, there are a couple things I want to champion for my district. I don't got the votes, so I'm going to look for bipartisan support up on the Hill, work with some maybe moderate Republicans that feel like they're not being heard? Or is it just, Hakeem Jeffries has said, we're going to sit back, team defense. We're going to let them miss the kick, right? Line up for a 59-yard field goal, which Rutgers should have done this past weekend. And Shiano, for some reason, called timeout. But what is the strategy here for people, especially the ones that are going to be listening because they know me and you from your district? Like, what is the strategy for you for 25 and beyond?
Yeah, I think it's two parts. We literally kind of actually starting to list this out on a whiteboard. Like, because of the existential affordability crisis my constituents who I took an oath to serve and protect are facing, like if there's a place to work with the president-elect on that, and he's made some big promises that would really help people, like lifting the SALT cap, for example, which double taxes about 80%, 70, 80% of my constituents who pay state and local tax, not taxing Social Security benefits, which would be transformative if we could get that passed. So I've actually been putting out publicly, hey, these are the things that I actually think would be great for my constituents, would help relieve this pressure. Let's get to work in a bipartisan way. That's the hopeful, optimistic side of me here, and also the one who has to do everything I can to help. At the same time, I think it's like protect mode, but that doesn't mean sitting back at all to me. It means leaning in and picking the right fights and being smart and strategic and not using the old playbook in terms of calling out whether it's bad appointments and nominees here that we're in that phase of it. But we've seen now a lot of the pieces of this very damaging Project 2025 that they swore wasn't their playbook. Like literally the people that wrote those chapters of the playbook are now in charge of the agencies in 3 or 4 different places. So we actually know their playbook. And I said this throughout the campaign, we have to believe Trump when he says he's going to do something. He generally has does it. So let's start to sit down and map out, like in my area of Armed Services Committee, what are the most damaging, dangerous things we think he said he's going to do? Let's have an active, prevent, kind of be on the offensive protection mode. And that could be, for example, like they've talked about purging military generals who don't pass some arbitrary litmus test that they don't like. That's so directly counter to the founding principles of our country in multiple dimensions. We have to see that coming and stand up to it before we're on our heels.
PatRyan.house.gov. Congressman, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the program. Continued success to you. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your staff, and please stay safe.
Thank you so much, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Go Army, beat Navy.